Appreciate you doing this. This is our last one of the winter break for us, and the first four have been really good. Kind of getting everybody's different perspectives, kind of all across the board. And obviously, with you being having been at WVU and been at Fairmont, and now being at Old Dominion, it's kind of good to get your point of view on how things are the same, how things are different. But to just start off, because I don't know if everybody knows who you are, kind of tell us what your title is and what your role is at Old Dominion, and then kind of what your path has been there to get there, as far as like being, starting all the way back to being with us at Pro, and then Fairmont and WVU, and kind of what's got you to being at Old Dominion.
So my name is Daniel Shaver. I started with Adam at Pro Performance back in 2020. Um, I then ended up taking the step to Brook High School while I was still there, which was a good learning experience for me. It got me kind of introduced to more team aspects of training rather than just one-on-one or 1-on-4. Um, Adam then took the job at Fairmont. I followed him down there. Ended up enjoying it a lot. Took an internship at West Virginia as a nutrition intern. Kind of got my foot in the door any way I could. It was kind of I didn't want to do it, but it was necessary for my development and steps in the right direction. Ended up meeting the strength staff, got to know them. They hired me on. So I worked at Fairmont and West Virginia in two different capacities at the same time. Ended up leaving the nutrition side, stayed at Fairmont and stayed on the strength staff at West Virginia, and now worked there for 2 years after that. The job opened up here at Old Dominion. I graduated college with my master's, and they said, "Do you want this position?" I said, "Sure." Moved on down here, and then they gave me the title of Assistant Director of Sports Performance, which is just a glorified title. I'm a paid intern on paper, so I appreciate that they did that because my resume looks great now because of that. But um, that's my path that's been started for me so far.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. What your job is on paper and what your salary is sometimes always doesn't match up in this profession, and that's okay. That's how you get it to where they do match up eventually at some point. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, kind of to start off, obviously, like, and this is we're gonna kind of get into this towards the end, but like when you kind of came in for that interview with us at Pro, whenever it was spring of 2020, um, did you like how much different did the path of getting to where you kind of are now, where it's obviously, again, you're not a complete full-time strength coach or a head strength coach somewhere yet, but did what has there been any like differences in terms of your expectations of what this path was going to look like, or anything that was like, oh crap, I didn't realize I was going to have to kind of be an intern for 3 or 4 years, versus like I thought I was just going to walk out the door with my diploma and here's $100,000 a year job.
I knew coming in it wasn't going to be a starting off going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to make six figures out the gate. I knew it was going to be kind of working my way up slowly, which it was to be expected. I was taught, in the undergrad and when I started at Pro that, there's steps to this, there's levels to it. There's, a path that you do need to take. Um, I didn't have a ton of expectations. Um, and I took every position that I've had so far as a big learning experience. Um, because each place has been drastically different from the next. From Power Five football, even down to Group of Five football. Now there's a wild change between the two. Brook High School to now is the high school level versus college level is drastically different. The private sector is different, and it was, I think, taking every step as a learning experience was what helped the most, rather than coming in with an expectation. If you come in with expectations, you're going to hurt yourself from the get go.
Yeah, honestly, that's really well said. You're getting a lot more articulate, Daniel. I don't know what happened these last like 6 months, um, but it's funny because actually we talked to Chandler, and I actually kind of, until you reminded me, I kind of forgot that you were going up to Brook when Chandler was going up there too. I kind of forgot about that. So obviously one of the big things I was going to ask you, which you kind of already started talking about, is what are some of the biggest differences that you have seen from Division II? Because obviously, like, you didn't mention this, but you only work with football at Old Dominion, correct?
Yes.
So you only worked with football at Old Dominion. You only worked with football at WVU, and then you worked with football mainly, but a handful of other sports at Fairmont as well. What kind of, and this can be as open ended as you want. It can be the athletes, it can be the facilities, it can be the coaching styles, whatever it may be. But what are some of those biggest differences between, and maybe even some of the similarities between what we did at Fairmont, what was you guys were doing at WVU, and what's going on at Old Dominion, and kind of just help us get an idea of what big things are different, what things are the same, like that kind of the details on those.
The biggest thing I would say is money. I mean, that's going to be the biggest gap between all of them. High school to D2, there's a massive gap in money. D2 to Group of Five, there's a big gap in money, and then Group of Five to Power Five, drastic difference in money. Um, and I would say that's the best or the biggest indicator between the levels. There's the training's all very similar. What we did at Fairmont is almost identical to what we do here. WVU did identical to what we do here too, because obviously Chad was a byproduct of Mike, and they, learned off each other, and it very similar. There's not too much new in the field these days. It's just, can you do it better than everybody else? But the facilities alone, I mean, you look at Fairmont, you have 8 racks, some dumbbells, and you got to get real creative with how you program, how you, set things up. And, we were blessed to have, that 60-foot indoor strip of turf, and got to be able to sprint up there during the winter. We don't even have an indoor here. We have no indoor turf, no nothing. West Virginia had a full indoor turf field. So you look at the step between those two levels alone, it's, there's a full indoor field versus nothing. We have no covered spots, no nothing. We have 2 practice fields, and that's it. So, like, if it's pouring down rain, you got to get real creative about how you program inside. And are we going to go sprinting? No, we're going to have to do a lot of more plyos inside. We're going to have to, kind of switch up our approach for the day. We have run rockets now inside, so we can kind of get away with it upstairs. But the programming alone, there's not much different. We're going to do Olympic movements. We're going to do the big 3. We're going to, we're going to sprint. We're going to do plyos. We're going to work on accessories. We're going to do a lot of shrugging. We're going to do a lot of, we do neck work. We do, you name it. It's all similar to what we've done in the past. So stepping into this role, it was very easy to kind of walk in because I've done it all before. And I'm very appreciative that I've had that experience of I've done it, so I can do it again. But I wouldn't say there's much different other than the facilities between the levels. Like here, we got machines, not a ton, a couple, which helps. But like Fairmont, there's, you got your 4 glued hams and your 2 reverse hypers, and the rest is bands and barbells and dumbbells, and you get it to work. But you don't need fancy stuff to get things done.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and it's kind of about what I would have thought. I'm actually really surprised. I mean, I know I remember you telling me that now that they don't have any indoor turf area. So you mentioned the Run Rockets. I know what they are, but maybe just, I mean, it seems pretty self-explanatory, I think, but maybe just elaborate on that, and maybe just, obviously you were only there for mainly in season, so you probably don't do as much like speed development, actual stuff in season as what you will here in the spring. But have you guys talked about what the plan is for the spring, and what will that kind of speed development look like? Like when you said, like a day like today when there's, an inch of snow on the ground, like how are you guys going to get done some of that speed development that you need to get done where you actually need to sprint guys when you don't have an outdoor covered space using just the resource that you guys have indoors?
So snow is not much of a factor down here. I mean, obviously we're by the beach.
That's true. But,
so rain is going to be our biggest factor, where we'll get 2 inches of standing water on our turf field at one time. Because it will rain almost every day here at some point, or get cloudy at some point. So you just kind of have to worry about mitigating that. So going back to the start of it, Run Rockets are a flywheel resistance sprint system. So you can basically hook a belt to yourself, load up whatever resistance you really want to on this flywheel, go out sprinting. It has a cable of about 40 yards. So you're not going to get, these long build sprints. You're going to get, your short 10, 15-yard sprints in, which you can still get the work done, work on acceleration mainly inside, and you're not going to get tempo runs done or anything like that, but you'll get those. What was your second question?
Basically, like what will that look like going into the spring? Like, well, I mean, obviously you'll get them outside as much as possible, but if there is a day where you have to be inside, like how many Run Rockets do you guys have? How much space do you have? Like how many, like if you're outside, you could have 20 guys doing a 15-yard acceleration at the same time. But if you're indoors, like how's that gonna, because again, that's something that we struggle with. Even though we have that 60-yard strip of turf, really we can only have one person doing something at a time on it.
So for us, our current plan of attack is getting them outside 4 days a week. One big linear day, one more big change of direction day, and then 2 more another linear day, and then kind of a conditioning, kind of just aerobic capacity day. Um, and then we've written out the next 3.5 months already. But it's going to be a lot of, we're not starting from scratch like we did last year, apparently. I looked over the plan from last year, and it's not starting from scratch. They're going to ramp it faster than what they were, which is nice because a lot of the guys coming in the transfer portal, even in high school, they're very well developed for their age. So we think we can start faster than what we did last year. Sprinting inside, if we have like a day where we have a ton of rain or whatever, we have 6 run rockets, so we can kind of get it to work. We have an upstairs area that it's pretty open. When we can set it up to where we can run 3 on each end and kind of get them kind of cross over, and it'll work. It's not going to be the best. It's the best case scenario for what we have up until we get in the new woodways that we're looking to get, which West Virginia had, and I know we're getting them here. It's in the process of going through financing and that sort of stuff. But as of now, it'll be, run 4 or 5 sprints and then go downstairs, hit our power cleans, and start our next part of our lift. And it's not going to be enough, but it'll be what we can get done. So that's kind of how our plan is for the spring. We're going to go 4 days a week and work on change direction and linear speed.
Gotcha. Yeah, and again, it goes back to kind of what you're saying. Like everything that we're kind of doing at Fairmont is going to be very similar. We just have to sometimes squish it instead of having 4, 5, 6 days a week to do it. We kind of have to squish it for our football guys into 3, 90-minute sessions instead of, 5, 75-minute sessions or whatever it may be. So to kind of go up, like back a little bit, like broader picture a little bit, can you give us a little bit more? So obviously like with your role, but how many coaches do you guys have working with football? And do they actually, any of the other football strength coaches, do they assist with any other teams outside of that? And like kind of what's that coaching structure really look like at Old Dominion?
So the head strength coach here, Chad Snodgrass, he only works with football. Myself, I only work with football. Johnny Pierre, he works with rowing as well. He's the head coach for rowing. Ben Smeriglio is women's lacrosse as well with football. And then Aaron Rittgers is field hockey with football as well. So all 5 of us work with football. The other 3 do another sport by themselves. The other role that I've taken on is more of a facility maintenance / like if things are broken, kind of whatever needs done that in the weight room or in the facility is kind of my role.
You had that role at Fairmont too.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Tyler's taking that role now. Him and Jacob, I guess they've built 2 of the lat pull down stations that we finally got installed on the racks. So good. They only had to take it apart 4 or 5 times before they figured out how to do it right. But
it's a learning process. But so yep. If things need to be done that the other 3 are working with their team or whatever, it's going to get put on my desk and I'll take care of it. So I've kind of moved into the role of like, if it needs done, put it on mine, I'll get it done. Because I only work with football. So it kind of works out to where I can take over things like that. But that's kind of the current coaching structure, is that 2 of us work with football and then 3 of them work with another sport as well.
And then they have other people that handle just the Olympic sports then too. Like
so there's 3 coaches on the Olympic side, one that does baseball and I think another sport, I think golf. And then there's 2 others that do kind of the rest. They just kind of divvy it up between them.
Okay. I got to ask, because this is something that obviously was important to us, important to me at Fairmont, and obviously kind of coming from that WVU coaching tree. And I know Chad obviously is going to be huge on it, but what's the rep integrity aspect at Old Dominion, and kind of how has that been something that's Chad's had to probably ingrain into the culture there?
So rep integrity is massive here. It is, we follow something called the standard, and it is the standard. It's printed out a couple places in the weight room, talking about like, this is how things are done, and we will do them to that level. And if you don't, you are messing up. You are making a mistake. So we are doing them to this caliber. It's more or less, we don't care what weight's on the bar. We'd rather see technique. We'd rather see speed. We'd rather see, if you can, you can clean 225, but if it looks like shit, I'm not going to take it. I'd rather you do, 185 and it move 1,000 times better, and I'll take that over 225. The weight on the bar doesn't matter to me. Coming from somebody who chases numbers like that, you kind of have to take a step back and follow the standard of what we do. Guys coming in, we set the standard from day one. We try to break whatever their old habits are out the gate, because if you don't, you're going to lose from the get-go with these kids. Especially guys coming in from the portal with other programs. You get kids that their coaches didn't care what the technique looked like as long as they got the weight up. So now coming in, they kind of fight you on it a little bit of like, oh, this is what we did. It's not anymore. This is what we do here. And it's very much, you have to break it day one. High school kids are easier because they don't understand anything yet when they get to college. So you can teach them out the gate of like, here's how things are done. Here's how we do things, and you're going to do them that way. Our rep integrity is very high here, and players have taken it upon themselves to call each other out. We've kind of set that in place for these kids to, they will call out if a teammate's skipping reps, or we had a guy call out his teammate for skipping an entire set off of something. And we have a standard punishment for it, and everybody will pay the punishment, and then they'll get on that kid, and we won't have to deal with it. We won't have to, their teammates will take care of it. If you get yelled at by a coach, it's all right, you got yelled at by your coach and you'll kind of you'll do it again. But if your teammates are getting on you, it hurts a lot more. So these kids, we wanted to build kind of that culture of these kids need to take care of themselves and kind of police themselves so that we don't have to. And we've gotten to that point where we can do that now. I know coming in, Chad struggled a lot with some of the older guys that were there with the previous strength staff that just let things happen. Like they would clean 315, their feet would be out past the plates, catching it, whatever, just kind of muscling through it. But they all had to take a step back and understand, like, that's not how you're supposed to do things. You're supposed to do things right. So now we've gotten to that point where 96% of people are bought in here to how we do things. Which is what I love.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's something that, again, we're still not perfect. We're probably, I would say, depending on the team, in that 90th percentile for most of our teams. But, we just had basketball today, and, it's one of those things where we can have guys on the basketball team literally in the same rack together. One guy's doing something perfect, one guy's doing something completely wrong, and no one will bat an eye at it. Like it still blows my mind sometimes. Just, I think it's something that, just culture, things are different, like with athletes coming up now, and not to get all the way down that whole rabbit hole and tangent of just society just kind of being softer to an extent, and not nobody wanting to hurt somebody else's feelings because they don't want to call them out for fucking something up, when it's like that's really what being part of a team is. Like if you get a job, all of you guys, if you guys mess something up, like I'm going to tell you about it. Like, and if you can't get your feelings hurt, it's there to make everybody better. So it's just one of those things that I love, like, of all the things that I took out of when I was at WVU 9-10 years ago, whenever it was, like, that's the number one thing that I took away from them is the rep integrity. And we talked about this right before the semester was over as a staff meeting. And I know I talked to you and Javi about it a lot. Like every single place that I've been the best strength coach at looking at holding people accountable for rep integrity. So I just think it's something that they need to hear from you and not just from me all the time, because it's so important.
And I think one of the things that definitely I've learned, at least while being here, is pairing certain kids together on the racks. I pair my worst and best kid all the time, and they hate me for it, but I know it's going to make both of them better. One, the kid that's good is going to be a better leader, and the kid that's bad will get drug up regardless. And if he doesn't get drug up, I will leave him behind. At some point, we're going to be like, all right, dude, you don't care, step out. We're going to tell you to transfer at the end of the season, kind of be on your way.
Yeah, no, I agree. So kind of just to go back and talk about the fall a little bit, obviously with it being your first semester, so when did you start? Were you there in the summer at all, or did you start?
Yeah, I got here in July.
Okay. So even going all the way back to kind of July, what does a week look like for an Old Dominion football player kind of throughout the late summer throughout the season? Like how many lift sessions are you guys doing? What kind of, are you guys doing any type of conditioning at practice, or is it all done outside of that? Like what does that normally look like on a like a general week on average?
So back in July, we did 4 lifts a week. And then we did 2 kind of on-field sprinting days and 1 big conditioning or 2 conditioning days. So we did a change of direction day and a very linear day, and then 2 conditioning, building up to fall camp. Obviously, fall camp is a very long and grueling process. Um, but we guys had Saturdays and Sundays off in July. Let them rest, kind of build some work capacity before they get kind of crushed in camp. And then we hit camp, and it was 3 days on, 1 day off for the entire month of August. There was no breaks. It was you get that 1 day off. We were still in. All the players still had to be in doing something, whether it was in here recovering with us or the athletic training staff. They had to come in and do something to better themselves. It didn't matter what it was. But we were in, and we did a lift, and then like kind of like a regen day, and then a lift again during those 3 days. We wouldn't do a ton of conditioning because they were just getting crushed at practice every day. So we weren't conditioning or doing a ton of sprinting. We tried to get some in, but we realized pretty quickly on that it was just not worth it. They were just going to get blown out in camp. Once camp got over, we moved to a 3-day a week. We lifted on Sunday. We took Monday completely off because in Division I football, you have to have 1 day off minimum. So we took Monday completely off. There was nothing required of these kids. Tuesday, we had more of our speed kind of day. We did our squatting and we did like speed squats and our heavier like movements of the week. Wednesday was our travel only lift. So our guys that played, they lifted and did upper body and power cleans. That was our big power day. It was Wednesday. And then Thursday was our developmental / non-travel day where guys were, if you weren't traveling, you were going to come into that lift at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was, it was going to suck, but it was beneficial to you. Friday was our conditioning day for those kids that didn't travel. They got to come in and, again, 6 o'clock in the morning, you're out on the field running, doing tempos, striders, whatever it may be, half gassers. And we did our primer on Fridays before we traveled. So we try to hit our 90% of our top speed, which they had to hit at minimum one other time in the week during practice, whether it was Tuesday or Wednesday. They had to hit 90% of their top velocity on GPS, which by the end of the season, we got very good at hitting it. At the beginning of the season, we struggled. We had to fight some kids on it, kind of teaching them why it was necessary to prime the nervous system. But it worked out towards the end of the season. Like we would only get 1 or 2 kids that wouldn't hit it. And those were our kids that were playing every snap. They weren't like guys that were coming on off the field a lot. It was the guys like our quarterback who started every game except for 1, and he was getting pretty beat up because we had the worst O-line in the country. We literally let up like 67 sacks this year. It was terrible. So like him not hitting his 90%, we weren't overly concerned about because this dude was just beat up. So we were trying to just keep him healthy enough to play. But that was kind of how our season worked out. Saturday we played. Sunday we'd be back about 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday mornings from wherever we were playing. And then we would come in about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday to lift, kind of get some blood flowing. It wasn't a lift that was going to crush you. It was just, we're going to start trying to flush the system a little bit so that Monday you can have completely off. And then Tuesday, we're going to start our work days again.
Yeah, I got you. I like that schedule. And that's something, again, that I've been kind of, I don't know how we would do it at Fairmont. It's tough. Maybe something to talk about with when we figure out who our new head coach is and everything. But I'm really starting to lean so much more into trying to get some sort of like max velocity sprinting in season. It's something that I might even, talking about baseball here in a couple of weeks when they start back up. Just something, because there is going to be, especially for the athletes that don't play. Like if you're a starting wide receiver or starting DB and you're getting hundreds and hundreds of sprints throughout the week, and you got to go out and play. Like I understand maybe not wanting to do 2 or 3 extra sprints, max effort with like our laser gauge or with you guys with the GPS. Same thing with baseball players. If you're an outfielder and you're running all over the place every weekend, but if you're not, like it's something that it's again, we know that sprinting is the #1 preventer of sprinting injuries, right? So we have to be able to kind of microdose those in. Which that's two things that makes me want to ask you, which I have on my notes. One of them is catapult, which we'll come back to here in a second. But the other thing is, and you don't have to get into the details of anything of like the type of injuries or the actual injuries that you guys had or who got injured or anything. But injury prevention is kind of a farce. You're chasing a ghost. But in terms of like injury mitigation, is there anything that like you guys like as a staff have talked about? Like, hey, we did this. We did the Friday sprints to kind of prime the system that helped us maybe alleviate some potential injuries on a Saturday on a kickoff game day. Or hey, we do that recovery lift on Sunday that helped us be ready to go for Tuesday's practice. Like, is there anything that you guys, or hey, maybe we need to do this better next year? Is there anything that you guys kind of learned from this season or implemented this season that you thought was big bang for your buck, that maybe something again that at our level that we can even take and utilize?
So you're right. You can't prevent an injury. It's if somebody tells you they can, they're lying to you. You can't prevent an injury, but you can help mitigate things. Here, especially, we do a lot of shoulder, a lot of neck work, a lot of shrugging, kind of prevent whiplash, concussions. I mean, we had, I think, 3 this season in total, which is impressive considering the average across the country is about 11. I think we had 3 or 4 from since I've been here, we've had 3 or 4. And most of them were freak accidents, nothing, that we could have prevented. And I think the biggest thing we learned was the most amount of injuries we had were foot related. So like a toe or, just like plantar fasciitis or whatever it may have been. We're planning this spring on Wednesdays, which is going to be our kind of like our regen/recovery day this spring. We're going to go completely shoes off. We're going to work on kind of some proprioception work, kind of building up the strength and kind of the stability in the foot, because that was our biggest set of injuries that we had all season. I mean, we had 7 or 8 turf toes, and it was kind of like we looked at it and went, everything else seems to be fine. They were just like freak accidents that happened for the injuries. They were nothing, we could have prevented, but except for the feet. And we think these kids just need to walk around, train without their shoes for a little while to strengthen the foot up a little bit and kind of build that structure. And I think that's what we learned the most out of this season, was kind of strengthening the feet a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Did you guys have any hammies or groins or anything like that?
We had 2 hamstrings, one from a kid who didn't really think that sprinting was super necessary. Max effort sprinting, runs out in camp and blows his hammy up. We had one kid who his mechanics were so bad that when he went to sprint max effort with us, he tweaked it. He was a transfer. He got healthy, played all season, did great. But those were the 2 biggest ones. We had 1 groin, but again, it was a freak accident. He was our punter and he got hit while he was kicking. So it was kind of we couldn't have changed anything there.
Right. No, it's you say that, and I know when we were it seems like we had a lot because the coaches were making such a big deal about it, but we really only had 3 or 4 guys that missed really any time because of hamstring issues. It was just kind of guys that were kind of important, like either first string or second string guys that were going to play a lot. And the thing with me is, like, I think we had the better in-season prep this year than we did last year even. And I think it's just one of the things, but it's like you said, it just happens and you can't always prevent everything. I do think it's a volume issue more than anything else. I think it's the amount of volume that they're doing at practice always needs to be addressed, and no one ever wants to talk about that. They always want to talk about what are you doing in the weight room. But again, that's a whole other side discussion. But the interesting thing about it is I went down this deep rabbit hole of looking at the research papers of, what's the average injury rate in the NFL for soft tissue injuries, hamstring specifically, Division I college football. There's not a lot of data on D2, but if you look at the averages, I think the average was like in the 30s or something like that. We were at like less than 10% of our team had a soft tissue injury. So just like you said about the concussions, like I want to say that we maybe had, I don't even know. Caleb, do you remember? Did we have more than 1 or 2 guys with a concussion all season? Like, I can't even remember. So again, it's one of those things where obviously our game's not played at the same speed that your guys' game is. So that's something, in fact, our collisions aren't as violent as your guys' collisions. But it's just one of those things where I do think, trying to put those things, there's those injury preventative philosophies, kind of putting them at the forefront of your program is something that's still important to do, even if we realize that it's not going to solve every issue. Caleb, do you remember if and how many we had?
The only ones that I can remember right now is Leonard had one, and then Jalen had one like the very first game. Those are the only two that I can remember who got concussions.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. And then I do remember there was that one freshman or whatever transfer O lineman that had one late in the season that kind of missed the last 2 weeks. But I don't know if that was. Well, I'm not going to say what I was going to say. Anyway, so you mentioned Catapult, like other sports tech. Like, what are you guys utilizing? Kind of give us a rundown of what you guys are looking at with Catapult, and then are you guys using any force plates, any like velocity based training devices, and kind of what your main like your big rocks are that you're looking at and utilizing those resources for?
So sports tech wise, we have Catapult. I took over that when his name was Quan. When he left, I ended up taking that over, which was a blessing for me because I really wanted to work with that stuff so I could kind of get better at it. Definitely a big learning curve to that. Obviously, you're working with thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of equipment there, but our biggest ones are Catapult, Nordboard, and jump mats. We are looking into VBTs currently. We don't have any. We don't want purchase. I think they're a little bit overpriced, which that's pretty accurate. I'm not paying $3,000 per unit. We have 20 racks. It's not happening. But we're looking into a cable system, kind of like how we had the V-True for a little bit. But our big four are probably going to be Nordboard, Catapult, jump mats, and eventually a VBT system. And kind of learning how to place them is kind of an interesting topic in our programming. We think on Mondays are probably going to be our best bet for both our Nordboard testing and our jump mat testing. And we're going to cycle them every other week, kind of figure out how we're going to utilize them best we can. So week one, we're going to come out, everybody's going to jump on the jump mats. And then the next week, they're going to come out and do their Nordboard testing. And the next week after that, we'll do jump mats again. We don't test broads here very often. From what I remember in July when I got here, we tested them twice. I guess they did them over the summer, but we weren't super testing them. We didn't test anything really in the fall except for Nordboard. But every day at practice, we use GPSs. Every day we're on the field, we'll use GPSs. Kind of just measuring workload, speeds, kind of acceleration. And we're starting to look into the acceleration and decelerations of different players, kind of how aggressively can they stop or not stop, especially with injuries. We started putting them on injured guys coming back, return to play. I know you haven't touched on that yet, but a return to play protocol for our guys, like we're going to start putting them on there. Like, all right, here's how much workload we can hit for the day. Once you're at that, you're done. We'll cut you off. And then the next time we come out and run, we'll kind of slowly build back up. Or, hey, you're progressing faster than we thought. We'll start ramping it up a little bit quicker. And we can kind of work on their top speed and kind of rebuilding that, especially guys coming back from like a hamstring or an ACL. Like we had a kid come back from an Achilles and we used the GPS on him every day, but he was coming back to running, which helped him because we realized, all right, you got really beat up from changing direction. So we're going to back off that a little bit, but your linear didn't hurt you too much. So we could build the linear faster than we could build the change of direction. And then we use the Catapult to kind of understand, like, all right, now we can work on his workload on change of direction and kind of build that slowly now that his top speed's back, which was good. But his deceleration came back a lot slower than anything else, which is not surprising. It's an Achilles tear, but.
Is there, so I mentioned this earlier and I forgot to kind of follow up on it. So using the Catapult, like in terms of like the speed development aspect, like what kind of, let me back up and say it like this. How much of a factor are what you guys are seeing on the Catapult? Is that being relayed to the sport coaches, to the football coaches, and how much are they changing? How much are they changing practice one way or the other, adding stuff, taking stuff out? Like looking at like, okay, we have a bunch of guys trending this way, or we have a bunch of guys that need to hit this velocity today. So we need to make sure that we have this segment of practice geared towards like, what is kind of the biggest influence that the data that you guys are able to collect with your Catapult, with your GPS, your speed data, influencing what the coaches are doing?
So the one thing that I've seen as a blessing is that almost all, except for maybe one coach are bought into this, about what we do here as a strength staff, which is great for us because that means we just kind of get to do what we need to do and every day we have practice or we do speed training, the coaches get sent an email of a kind of a GPS report of the day of like, all right, here's the 10 kids we had on or the 24 kids we had on GPS. They get to pick who's on it. So we don't get to kind of pick who's on GPS every day. So they kind of get to look at it and go, all right, so I want this kid to run this day. I want to see how much he's working or how fast he's moving. During the fall, they use the data of like, all right, on Tuesday, we're going to do our biggest work day. And then Wednesday, depending on how much we did on Tuesday, we can back off a little bit, which was nice to be able to see that they were taking the data we were collecting and actually utilizing it. Our head coach is very bought into that, which is nice. We have I think our corners coach is the only one who's not truly bought into it, but he's getting better. Now our safeties coach is probably the most bought in out of anybody. This dude asks me every time we run live, he's like, hey, are my guys hitting it? Are they at their player loads? Or what's it kind of looking like? Which is nice to see that they're buying into what we do. But they do take into consideration how much effort these kids are putting in to what they're doing. So halfway through practice, a coach might ask me hey, what kind of player load are we looking at? He's at about 75% and we're halfway through practice. So he'll start running his 2s or 3s into the rotation a little bit more to kind of mitigate some of the potential injuries or issues we're going to run into. Be like, hey, we have 10 more periods to go through. You probably should back this kid off a little bit or, pull him for 1 or 2 reps.
The threshold of the volume that they're hitting or the workload that they're hitting, is that based off the general practice for the first couple of weeks of the season? Is it based off the game workload? What is that? How are you guys figuring out your kind of acute to chronic ratio there?
Average. We take an average of camp and then the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, we just kind of looked at an average of how much effort was being put in. And then every week we were all right, this kid's trending about the same direction. He's staying very similar across the board for his workloads. So we kind of used that of all of a sudden he had a big spike of 125%. We were whoa, you might want to back him off tomorrow. He did way too much in practice today compared to what he's normally doing in a week. And they would kind of look at that being okay, well, we'll cycle in guys a little bit more tomorrow just to kind of get him some. Now they would keep him back there to do mental reps, kind of be looking at what his read should be or whatever, but they would take him out of a play for a couple plays to kind of get some subs in there to kind of work a little bit more, which is, I think it was nice because they used the data, but we took just the averages across camp. And then that's kind of how we started figuring out through this season.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. That's probably the biggest thing, to be honest with you, that I'm kind of jealous of having that as a resource. Just being able to, whether it's from my own brain, my own knowledge of knowing what's going on at practices, and or more so just being able to help the coaches, figure out what we should be doing on a day-to-day basis. Because I think we would have coaches, I think our basketball coaches, both men's and women's, I think they would be very willing to understand hey, you guys thought today was supposed to be an easy practice and ended up being a really hard, long practice. And, versus, today you thought was going to be a hard practice and ended up being easier because it was easier in the sense because it was just more intense, but it was actually you talked a lot more, whatever it may be. And just showing that this, so they, as they're preparing through each game week of hey, maybe we need to kind of switch what we're doing each day and mitigate, a little bit of the overuse things. But no, I think it's awesome. So does anybody have any questions? I'm going to just let you guys actually ask any questions if you have any right now before we kind of get into these last couple more coaching kind of career questions. But does anybody have any questions for Daniel regarding kind of what they're doing at Old Dominion, or what just he's seen and done at the 3 main places that he's been at so far from a training standpoint before we kind of talk about some of these coaching questions?
Yeah, real fast. So when you compare ODU and WVU with the position groups and stuff, are there a lot of variations in those workouts when it comes to the power development for maybe certain skill guys or compared to the line or something? Is there a lot of variations in the exercises or program design in general?
Currently every position, not every position group will get a different program. Skill, combo, line, they'll get their own. Kickers, punters will get their own. Quarterbacks will get their own. So there's 5 different programs that are written just for their kind of needs and what we see fit. So your skill guys are going to do a lot more unilateral work. Our line will do a lot more bilateral, and then our combos are kind of a good hybrid between the two. Punters are just kind of on their own, kind of working on, what they need. There's a lot of power development there, just to be able to kick the ball harder. And our quarterbacks are doing a lot of shoulder care, a lot of, because it's like baseball. You're going to do a lot of throwing overhead. You're going to have overuse injuries. So mitigating that, they might have half the volume upper body wise as the rest of the group, and then they're going to spend the next 25 minutes the rest of the lift and stretch or do kind of like drive line work or whatever it may be. And that's kind of how we program. West Virginia was very similar. They might have used different machines for different groups. So like the skill guys or the combos might have used the single leg curl rather than the double leg curl, and then the line would have used like the double leg curl, just because it was a little bit more bilateral. But again, quarterbacks and punters were all kind of on their own there too. It's a very similar structure between the two. And at Fairmont, I remember it was a little bit harder we could do a skill combo and line workout, but separating a quarterback out of that was, we modified a little bit, but it's a lot harder when you only have 2 or 3 coaches, and you can't take all quarterbacks one-on-one in a group. So.
Right. Yeah, and again, it's something that I wanted to try to continue to keep doing better with our position groups, and that's not even just football. That's A&T, the bases and the tops might not always need the exact same stuff. Baseball, the pitchers, catchers, and the position players might not always need the exact same stuff. But again, it's always hard. Your forwards and your guards and your centers in basketball might not always need the same stuff. It's trying to do as much general work as we can, and then if we can specify things and be specific a little bit more here and there, we can. It'd be great. And maybe that's something, again, Tyler, like as I'm thinking about it, it might be something we do a little bit this year. Like if we have quarterbacks all in the same group together, maybe that's something where, hey, in this complex, they're going to go do some of the reverse throws and some of the med ball throws or whatever it may be, instead of doing some extra, A, B, and C exercise. That does make me want to ask though too, Daniel, do you guys have, like, I know when I was at WVU, kind of each strength coach kind of worked with a certain like position group. Is that kind of how you guys are doing it, where there's like a guy that is like the speed guy that works with the skill players, or like how are you guys kind of splitting up their responsibilities throughout the training sessions?
I'm the only one that has a specific kind of group out of all of the coaches. I take all injuries. So I'm doing all of the modifications, all the injury, let's say this kid has a torn ACL, he tore his ACL last week. He's doing single leg and then all upper body. And I'm the kid, I get to work with them a little bit more one-on-one, one-on-two. The rest of them are kind of split up. So like, we don't have a set, like, all right, all skill guys are in this one group. It's kind of like a line, skill, combo, you kind of get them split a little bit. So you're like, your bigger skills might go with your combos or vice versa. Chad generally takes the line. Johnny generally takes the offensive skill. Ben's with the combos and Aaron's with the defensive skill, from what I can kind of tell. But they do cycle them around. Sometimes Aaron has all combos, or he might have all line for whatever reason. And that sort of stuff. There's no set, this is who works with what group. I know at West Virginia, they pretty much had set, here's your group, and that's it. Like, you are taking these guys for the whole season, unless they get injured, and then they're going to move over to Mitch, and that was kind of about it. But I'm the only one with a specific set of people that, all right, this kid has a torn ACL. He spent the entire season with me, and that's, or we have a kid that had a spinal injury. And so he spent the entire season with me, never back squatted, always did hip press or, did split squatting, whatever it may have been.
You guys have a pitch chart?
We have one pitch shark. We don't use it a ton. But we have 2 hip presses. We do use our pitch shark, but very specific cases.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of, unless Caleb, Jacob, Brooke, I don't know if you guys have any other questions on that kind of stuff for Daniel. We're going to jump into some of these other kind of just coaching progression things. So what would you say, and you kind of talked about this a little bit at the very beginning, but what would you say would be some of the things like that you struggled with early on as a strength coach, as an intern, going into your strength coaching roles, and kind of what maybe basically the biggest learning curve, aspects that were biggest learning curves for you?
The biggest thing I'd say is understand you know nothing. Coming into it, like I thought I knew what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. So learning how to take a step back, just kind of close your mouth, watch, and just watch was definitely a big thing. And I struggled with that very early on, but kind of figured it out as time went on. Close your mouth, open your eyes, listen, and they'll tell you what you need to know from that. But I'd say that was probably the biggest thing. Don't have expectations coming in. If you come in with expectations, you're setting up yourself up for failure. Because you have no idea what you might like. You might think, oh, I don't want to work in the private sector, but one person might change your opinion on that. You know, you might be like, oh, I want to go work D1. Then you work with one client, and all of a sudden you're like, I want to stay private. You know, because D1 is a lot of stress. I mean, you're in at 4:30 and 5 o'clock in the morning, and you're leaving at 7 p.m. And these kids are, I'm gonna be honest, a bunch of assholes. So you get to deal with them on a daily basis, and it's like, shit, this is a lot of stress that you're under because you have pressure from all the position coaches. And so having expectations is a big killer for that one. I think those are the big ones for me, is like just learn as much as you can and find the right mentors. I think I've had 3 phenomenal mentors, Adam, yourself included in that. You know, even giving me just an opportunity to learn, adjust, and figure out how to do this. Because there's no set plan. Everybody's got a different path. I mean, I went private to high school to D2 to D1 to back down to a lower level D1. But for all I know, I'm going back to private next, or I'm going, you know, D3 or NAIA. But a lot of people get stuck in the mentality of like, oh, this is where you're supposed to go. But at the end of the day, you might not know. So it's just taking it one step at a time, being where you're at. And then last thing is just learn as much as you can. I mean, I've picked up books that you recommended to me a long time ago, like the Quadrant System. I just bought that book. You know, I want to read it here soon. I reread the West Side Book of Methods. Like, I still understand nothing out of that book. I've read it 4 times. You know, but a constant, there's always something to learn, right? Like Nordboard, when I first started using them, I had no idea what we were doing, but eventually I learned and I was like, all right, I can understand this now. Catapult, I picked it up. I was like, what the hell is all this data that I'm looking at? And over time, I slowly learned and kind of figured out how to read it, look at it, and understand why we do it, what the necessary point of it is. And I mean, the biggest thing is sports tech is massive now. So understanding and using it is going to be beneficial if you can find it.
Yeah, I think a couple things that you definitely hit on the head there of not having, I think it's one of those where not having expectations of what every job and what your path is going to be like. Like, you can kind of have your little vision boards and your goal boards and things like that. I think that's fine. I think the biggest thing is more having standards for yourself. I think that's the most important thing. Having set expectations of yourself, of in terms of like, I just want to show up and be the hardest working person in the room, be willing to do anything that they ask, be willing to learn and take on any responsibility that somebody's giving me. Because obviously there's times where, you know, like you said, like as silly as it sounds, like you being able to put something together for me in the weight room, like that's a burden off of my, you know, off my plate, that I can go do something else that's, to me, at least at that point in time, I'm more valuable doing that than taking barbells apart. You know what I mean? Whereas that was the most valuable thing that you could do right there. And again, it's one of those things where, as a strength coach, like part of our role is we're just trying to be valuable. Like, you're trying to get hired somewhere, you're just trying to be valuable, like in whatever capacity that is. And obviously that's something that I'm sure, you know, Chad's probably seen the exact same things. Obviously Mike and them saw the same thing for me. Obviously that's the reason why you got this job, because you were at WVU and Chad left, and you were probably one of the first people that he called. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things where being valuable to whatever, in whatever realm and you can possibly be, and being
make yourself marketable. That's it.
Make yourself marketable. And then the other thing that you said about like constantly learning, like, you know, I'm literally, so we've actually, not to kind of get off topic, we've been doing these CSCS preps because everybody on this call needs to be sitting for their CSCS soon, and or has already done so. And so we've been doing this, and it's one of those things where, like, even though everything in that book, like I know, it's just like reading it again. As I've read that book 10 years ago, and reading it again, there's still little things that I can take from it, not to necessarily make me better at the CSCS, but to make me better at just like relaying that information to the athletes or to the coaches or whoever it may be. And even I had to do my CEUs to keep my CSCS and all that up to date. I had to finish it here by whatever. I finished it before Christmas, but just watching some of the videos and stuff like that, like every little opportunity that I get, like it's so important to me to like keep getting better. One of the videos I watched was a Mike Boyle video where he's like, I've been a strength coach for 32 years. He said for about the first 31 years and 11 months, he said, I've gotten everything wrong. He said, right now is the only time I feel like I've started to get anything right. And he said, ask me in a year and I'll tell you that in the last 32 years, I've gotten everything wrong. So it's one of those things where it's like, he's been doing it for 30 years and he's still kind of learning stuff and getting better. But
the one I'd say the most is talk to other coaches in the field. I stay in contact with all of the coaches I've worked with in the past, except for one. I just didn't think he was a great guy. He was at West Virginia still. I just don't care to keep in contact with him, but I keep in contact with the rest of them. Even the dude I met for 1 month, because he worked at New Mexico State and he worked with MMA fighters on the side. Like he was John Jones's private coach for a year and a half. Like John Jones was a specimen, obviously, but learning from him of like, okay, why did you program this for him? What did you see that you saw that necessary? Working with somebody like Nolan Harvath, dude is extremely switched on when it comes to throwing mechanics, because he worked with baseball for years, but then now works with all of West Virginia's quarterbacks because they're throwing athletes again. But Nick Meadows was a phenomenal guy to learn off of for sports tech, because that's what he did most of the time he was there. And then obviously Mike was just been around for decades in the field, so it was just learning off of the coaches I've been around has helped. And now I just reach out to other coaches to talk to them. I have no connection to them. I've never spoken to them before. I'll shoot them an email, be like, hey man, would you mind sitting down for a conversation? I got 20, 30 questions I got to ask you. And some of them will respond and tell you no, but I mean, some of them will just be like, yeah, sure. I don't care. I got free time tomorrow, and all of a sudden you're learning off of this guy who's been in the field for 15, 20 years about something that's, still relevant, or it's becoming relevant. I talked to Iowa's speed director for 25 minutes the other day about how to use catapults for speed development. And I thought it was beneficial for myself. Could I have learned it off somebody else? Sure. But he was the one that answered the phone.
Yeah. And again, I think that goes back to something we've talked about in some of these previous calls. Well, first of all, number one, it highlights why we're even doing these calls, right? Why are we like kind of keeping my network all together, but also and letting you guys meet each other, but also kind of hearing from you and hearing what you guys and all the other coaches that I've had to, what you're learning, what you've had to say. But I think it's one of those things where like you have to, this profession forces you, just like we expect from our athletes, it forces you to kind of go out and fight for your own path and your own opportunities. Like you can't wait around and expect me to give you guys a research article and say, hey, go read this and tell me what you learned. Like you guys should be going out and seeking those things out yourself, just like you're reaching out to other people and learning from other people. And, the one thing that is always stuck in my mind about that is, listen to those old Westside Barbell podcasts where Louis would talk about that. Louis would be like, before we had the internet, he said strength coaches used to call each other up on the phone. You'd get somebody's number out there. There was a directory in the back of like Muscle and Fitness magazine or something. And you'd call somebody that would be living in California and you'd plan this whole trip to go see him, and you never met him in person at all until you drove out there. People would drive to Westside Barbell from all over the country just to learn what Westside was doing. You know what I mean? It's one of the things you couldn't just go on YouTube and watch, or Instagram and watch what they were doing. You had to do that. And I think there's a lost art to an extent of reaching out to somebody, talking to them in person, learning from them. Like you could have sent us the program that you guys are doing at Old Dominion. You could have literally sent us exactly what you guys are doing, which I might still even ask you to do that if you're willing. But we're going to learn more by talking to you in this capacity, especially if we were in person and actually got to come watch one training session. We learn way more than just talking to you for an hour or just trying to read and regurgitate what you guys are doing down there. So I think that's all good and great information. Does anybody have any last minute questions for Daniel?
I have one. Whenever, like, when you interview different places, like, where are some of the places that you applied for or interviewed to, and what were some of like the common questions that you found between schools or job opportunities?
So I've probably interviewed 50 or 60 times now to different places. The only thing hindering me at this point is I'm young, and a lot of people just don't want to take a shot on a coach who's 24, freshly out of college. Like they look at it and go, you didn't GA anywhere. Or you just, you were an assistant for, 2 years. But the most common questions are, what are your beliefs? What are your, your Adam talks about your rocks that you're always working off of, and I still have mine. It's rep integrity, hard work, and dedication to what you're doing, and that's it. Like, that's what I believe in. But they're going to ask you the standard of like, oh, what's your background? Oh, what's your, how do you feel about this? But every school will have a different question that'll throw you through a loop. West Point was a big example for me when I interviewed there. If you had an unlimited budget, what would be the first sports tech thing you bought? And how would you implement it? And it just kind of threw me through a loop of like, whoa, like I was not prepped for that question. You can prep all you want, but thinking on your toes is going to be the best thing for you. But the standard questions across the board, what are your career path? What is your goals? Why do you feel like you fit this job? But it's every coach is going to ask something different. And then the biggest interviews that are going to screw you, be prepared for the ones with sport coaches on them, because they will attack you. I just interviewed at George Mason a couple weeks back. Did not get that position because the men's soccer coach didn't think I fit the description of what a strength coach should be. Like, not because I didn't know what I was doing, but because of what I looked like. I've only worked my resume. If you look at it, says a lot of football. There's not a ton of soccer experience. I worked with women's soccer for a semester. And if this was a men's soccer position with men's volleyball and softball attached, I worked for softball for 2.5 years. The softball coach loved me. He was all on board to hire me. Volleyball coach was, he was like, oh yeah, sure. He's like, you've worked with Division I athletes. That's fine. Men's soccer coach didn't like me at all from the jump, because he looked at my resume, and he looked at me on the phone call and went, ah.
You should have told him you squat and deadlift 700 pounds. You're strong as fuck.
He didn't care. I mean, he wanted to know why, X, Y, and Z benefited their soccer team. And I told him why. I was like, every strength coach has the same belief. You're going to sprint. You're going to do power cleans. You're going to do, this, and this. But the strength staff that I interviewed with there absolutely loved me. I'm still in contact with all of them. It was the sport coach that shot it down. And it was the only interviews that I thought were the hardest were the ones with the sport coaches on them. Because you can talk to a strength coach about anything in the strength field. It's not hard. But the ones with the sport coaches that are going to be like, well, yeah, can you get my players to look a certain way? Well, okay, why do you believe that they should look a certain way? But you can't challenge them in an interview. And I did. I didn't care. I wasn't getting the job anyway, because the men's soccer coach was the one picking the strength staff there. But I was like, I'm going to challenge him and be like, why do you feel like, your soccer player should be 170 pounds soaking wet and, they shouldn't be doing squats? Like, kind of challenging them on it. But I'm going to stick to my beliefs and understand that I'm me. I'm going to do what I want to do. And if they don't want to hire me, tough shit. I'm going to move on to the next one. So.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things where like not that you didn't want that job, but it's also one of those things where, like, if, I don't know, I was literally talking to one of our assistant football coaches today, because he doesn't know what the future looks like for any of them because of just the situation of hiring a new football coach. And, and I told him that I was like, if you're every job that I've ever gotten was because, like, I was literally just kept beating down the door to let them give me a chance to either interview or actually just hire me, and became almost like a pain in the ass to them because that's how I wanted it. But it's also like, as I'm interviewing for it, like, it just seems like the right thing. So, like, it's one of those things where, like, I don't know whether you want to call that like intuition or whatever, that feeling in your, like, that gut feeling or whatever. Like, it's just something like that job while you're interviewing and you have that person asking those questions. Like, that's one of those where, like, you know what, this might not, in the back of your mind, you might be thinking this might not be the right fit for me because I'm going to have to be dealing with this person. Not that we should go against people that are resistant and challenging us. Like, we want that as coaches. Like, I want to be challenged. I want my programs to be questioned because it makes me better, but not with somebody that has no clue what the heck they're talking about. Like, if they're telling you they want this, and that, but they don't know why, then their logic is way more flawed than our logic. Because even if we're wrong, but we have a why behind it, like, that's way more important to me. So
I also think a disagreement off the jump like that is probably not great, because they're going to just keep disagreeing with you the entire time you're on staff there.
Yeah. And that's when we've done these interviews, like when I've been on the selection committee for some of these other coaches, like, a lot of times we'll just ask open-ended questions, and Greg will tell us like, hey, don't really ask any follow-ups that are going to like make them have to explain it any further. If they couldn't give us a good answer right out of the gate, like that's what we're taking our notes on. Like we need to be able to make sure that we're hiring somebody that can be concise and be clear. And we don't want it to turn into an argument. We're not trying to have a philosophical belief right now, because if they're like you said, if they're kind of wearing it on the sleeve of, hey, this is my big rocks, this is what I believe in, this is why, then we're going to be able to pick up that on regardless. We don't need to butt heads with somebody on an interview process. So,
And I got a job. I got offered a position at an NAIA in Nebraska, and I turned it down because I ended up disagreeing with the sport coach on a phone call. The strength staff hired me. They were like, yeah, we want to offer you the position, and money wasn't phenomenal, but it was a full-time job. And I turned it down because I talked to the sport coach, and he and I literally had a full-on argument on the phone. And I was like, I'm not going to work with a dude that you don't even know me, and you're going to argue with me out the gate. So I was like, I'm going to stay on the staff that I work for that I end up loving. And, I'm going to stay here and then find a full-time job that I can understand that this is the better scenario for me.
Right. Jacob, Caleb, Brooke, you guys got any questions before we let Daniel go? No? All right, Daniel, man, it was good talking to you. I appreciate it. Sounds like you're doing a good job, getting a lot of thrown on your plate, which is awesome.
I haven't been fired yet, so.
Exactly. And we'll stay in touch, and we'll catch back up with you after the spring semester wraps up. All right.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. See you.